To kick off, this is a panel on the subject of Megagame facilitation and facilitation teams. I'm fortunate to be joined by three people with a great deal of experience in the area. So Bernie Ganley has been attending and running Megagames for many years now.
30 plus.
Sorry?
30 plus.
30 plus is what we'll say. He's designed at least 10 of his own, usually along the themes of rebellion and revolution, which is a particular interest of his. So he brings us a wealth of experience, and he's also been involved in the running of Megagame Makers on and off for the duration of its existence, really. So Bernie, welcome.
Hiya, thanks very much. Thanks for the invite.
Darren runs a group which I'm going to call Crisis Games. Correct me if that's wrong, Darren.
Yeah, that's good.
Based in Cambridge, which has run Megagames for various corporate customers as sort of team building exercises and learning exercises and so forth. He's adapted a couple of games. He's joined the many game designers who've adapted Watch the Skies to, in his case, a game called Arrival. And more recently, he's written his own Megagame Climate Crisis, which is a Megagame portraying the clash between the political and short-term and long-term drivers that add up to be the rather messy climate challenge. So, Darren, welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, great to be here.
Cheers. And John was one of the leading knights of West Coast Megagames in the States. He's also someone who can boast an adaptation of Watch the Skies. I beg your pardon, to his CV, and he's helped set up the West Coast Megagames network. Excuse me. I do beg your pardon.
Bless you.
Yeah. So yes, John has a lot of experience bringing together a team of relatively inexperienced Megagame runners and whipping them into shape in short notice. And we're glad to have him. Welcome.
No, thank you. Always feel like I'm in the shadow of giants when I'm around you guys.
Well, I assume you're referring to Bernie and Darren when you say that, and I fully agree. So we're here to talk about the facilitation teams that run Megagames. And I guess the first question I want to ask, and I'll just throw it open to any of you, is what skills are needed to help run a Megagame? What skills do you look for when recruiting your team?
Bernie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I prepared sort of something for each of the questions. In a very sort of different situation, incredibly lucky to belong to Megagame Makers / Chestnut Lodge. We've been doing these games for sort of decades now. There's over 100 games. Each of them probably had 5 to 30 control with them. So we've got a wealth of control, but as things move on, they do drift away. But again, we've been incredibly lucky in getting sort of newer ones to come in over those sort of decades. Because in many ways with a mega game, as Stalin said, cadres decide everything. And those control cadres just cover up all the mistakes of designers like me by facilitating explanations for the players to overcome what has been missed or what was not really the sort of the intention of the design. So incredibly lucky having that sort of wealth experience. Now, for other groups who are newer, I had here notes that you should, it's probably very helpful if you actually know them, who you're going to sort of line up to be control. Are they themselves competitive or cooperative players? Can they not only work with players who they're controlling, but other control and the designer? Again, the ability to fit into that sort of flattish hierarchy that is a mega. for newer groups to keep the rules as simple as possible. It's probably true for all games, no matter how experienced. Even Jim has certainly progressed from simplifying and what he calls light his rules over the years, made them far more playable, and they were already playable anyway, but far more playable with the audiences that we now have. So I think there's a progression to simpler and simpler rules, which sort of really helps out. So the last, you can't always have a control that has never played a mega game before. We probably go through the route of having, have you played 10 mega games? And then they'll move towards control. And the last one, the bugbear for me, is that some of the early Sandhurst games, their team controls from the college didn't want to be there. And they were a pain in the arses. They just were negative. They sat in a corner. They drank our wine when we were doing the games, which was the greatest insult known. They just sat in the corner and drank our wine. And so that was pretty bad. And some of the rules to begin with were quite ropey. Jim Wallman, Brian Cameron, doing the maps for the Sandhurst games, had to make them like Free Kriegspiel on the day. So there was very little sort of interaction, and that can sometimes be a downfall for newer teams. We were new then. And despite the supposed experience of Sandhurst, when it came to recreational games, it provided very little support at all. That was quite negative. And then the very, very last one I want to make is subject specialists who come to you can be a pain in the arse. For my 1866 game, I had 2 nationally renowned specialists for it who were so sneering of players and their lack of knowledge that Jim advised me to bin them. And it was the best thing I did for that game, because they would have just been so negative during the whole experience. So I think that is my notes for, for your opening question.
Yeah.
That's like
Wow.
skills that you don't need. The last one is like,
Yes,
yeah.
definitely. We want people who have empathy, for the players.
Yeah, I was going to say, we turn it round. It's a skill that's missing, isn't it, for that kind of person? Like they bring the one incredibly valuable thing, which is the wealth of domain knowledge. But if they lack the empathy and the insight into what makes a game fun, then they're useless to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is a lot to digest already, Bernie. And
Sorry about that. Yeah,
Not
but
at all.
you did send me the email about a week ago. So I'm coming to the end of my career. So I had about 2 hours to sit down and do that rant at work on the work computer.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, can I add a couple of things?
Absolutely,
as well, which
please.
just sort of emphasizing things that Bernie said. Really is I mean, I think you as a game runner, you want to be looking out for people who have empathy and sort of a desire to communicate. So people who can who stand back a little bit from their game and are also aware of what's going on in the room, and that desire to go and tell other facilitators, control, this is what's happening in my part of the game, and get the information back from their part of the game. And as well, what the first thing that Bernie mentioned, that the first couple of turns where the game design starts to break down, it's great to have the facilitators there who have the initiative to say, okay, this bit of the game that I'm looking after is not working. How am I going to fix it? And make that decision there.
And it can be from turn one. We did have one set in sort of Italy where it collapsed on turn one, and the control, I was only in a minor power state that day, but the rest of the control displaced to some extent the designer and ran with it because they had that wealth of experience and knowledge of previous Renaissance games to make it run.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess it was quite stunning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll ask a slightly controversial question there, maybe. Is there such a thing as bad initiative? Is there such a thing as control trying to fix something that didn't need to be fixed, or fixing it?
Yes. Very much so.
Okay.
Yes.
I sense a war story here.
I'm sure.
Well, I guess the question is, how there's that judgment call of how broken does the bit of the game have to be, and if your judgment call is, well, you know, the designer didn't do it the way I would have done it, or they missed out this thing and I'm going to fix it, then yeah, that's a poor judgment call. But yeah.
So, John, I'm sensing you've got a tale to tell here.
I mean, so I'm going to answer the original question because,
Okay,
and maybe I'll go into that. So for me, coming from the opposite end of the spectrum, right? When I started, not only had I never run a mega game, but nobody around me had played one, and maybe maybe there was one person in the room who'd even heard of a mega game, and if they had heard, it was Watch the Skies from Shut Up and Sit Down, right? So, and beyond that, I didn't run Watch the Skies, right? So I was in this huge other camp. So for a new player, a new designer coming in, I would say look for in this order, people who are empathetic, which you've already covered, people who can improvise, which you guys kind of get from your pre-experience, right? You know, as players, if they're going to be able to improvise, you know them a little bit, but making sure they can improvise within the rules, but they also are willing to understand the mechanics. Because if they just improvise and they decide, okay, I'm going in this new direction, they can completely throw off other subgames, right? But when I'm recruiting for a control team, I'll split up what I need. So I end up creating kind of a tiered structure because I don't have the luxury of believing my whole control team can hold that whole picture, as they may have never played a game at all. So I look for team leads who can fully improvise, fully understand those rules and work within them. And then I look for people under them that are more those communicators and can work with players more dynamically. And because of that, I don't have to rely on the whole control team necessarily understanding the whole host of the rules or being the one making those improvisation calls. Yeah. And then I think because we've been in the situation of not having that broad depth of pool of knowledge, we do a lot more training. So we'll like, I have minimum of 3 training sessions, and then I essentially run a mock game a day or more, because the number one thing a new controller or somebody who's only played 1 or 2 games can't get from reading the rules is timing. That timing of the turn, the flow of the turn. If they don't have that feeling, then those small design issues become 5-minute delays, 10-minute delays. So at least playing through 1 to 2 turns, even if there's no players in it, vastly changes the control team's perspective. And if you don't do that, you're doing that turn 1, turn 2, turn 3 in what, an 8 to 12 turn game. It's just,
we tend to have an extended turn 1. To try and, even with experienced ones, to work them into it. The game I'm working on with a new designer at the moment, we've actually done the economic elements within the pre-game handbooks, and so they've only got to deal with the operational stuff on turn 1, which is only half the game. So we've not defined it so heavily that there will not be changes over time, because it's a 7-turn game. But again, that problem of timing, I'm always amazed by the end. After about turn 4, we could probably half the turns because they're really incredibly up to speed.
Yeah, I mean, that's true on both the player and the control side, isn't it? Hopefully, most of your control come to the game able to run a full turn at speed, but actually one of the skills you're looking for in control is the ability to ease the players into the pace that the game needs.
Definitely. And
sort of be teachers almost.
Without shouting at them too much.
Absolutely. I like to think of it as turn 0. So frequently when I'm either designing or redesigning, I make sure there's an intro phase that deals with the mechanics, because just dry training players doesn't work, right? They have to be playing it to get that feeling, so it has to be within the game's context. So those briefings where you're just ramrodding information don't work, but that turn 0, turn 1 fluid turn, especially if it's within the narrative of the game, those work great.
So, John, you mentioned the idea of having sort of facilitator teams with that sort of semi-hierarchical structure, and I guess there's a broader question there on what different roles exist, whether that hierarchical structure is sort of a necessity only because you have inexperienced people, or whether there's actually value in it in any game. Sort of. So the question is, what ideally do we think the breakdown of roles is, and do we think there are distinct categories of facilitator roles?
From my experience playing with my groups, which are on the inexperienced side, and playing in games with more experienced controls, I actually think the best case scenario is a almost even distribution, like a flat curve, where there's maybe one final judge, but the game more or less runs parallel. Because there are so many different decisions that if any individual gets in the mindset, I need to go check with game control, and they're not making their own decisions, that decision lag becomes a huge part for players, right? They see that. They're like, oh, you can't answer my question. You're going to that guy over there. And some players, if they have enough initiative, they'll start jumping control. Like that happens all the time. So I think that if you can manage it, that broad scope where it is, this is my person and they have authority over this area, that's the best case scenario. I think that hierarchy to play when you have people who can handle their sub game, but to give them the broader context actually makes them unable to control. And then you need to go into a more hierarchical, in my experience.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and sort of across the flat structure, as it were, do we think there are different kinds of control, different kinds of facilitator?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, so it all depends on the game, right? So unfortunately, a lot of conversations in the international community get brought around Watch the Skies like games, right? But there's so many different types of mega games, and they require vastly different control styles, right? Your game that's relying on more of a Kriegspiel type map control-esque play is completely different than an economical game, is completely different than a diplomacy subgame, is completely different than a debate subgame, right? All of those different types of subgames, or even entire games that are based on those structures, need a different style of control. I believe I've heard you guys refer to that as casting, right? You guys have played with players, so you know what roles to cast them in. I almost have to go through an audition process. So say I'm running a Watch the Skies, I have to go, okay, I've got the UN. I need a moderator for the UN who is able to then take that moderated debate and apply it to the game. For the map, I need a mechanics-heavy person who's going to understand the mechanics and be able to run people through at speed, right? Yeah. For trade, I need somebody who can do numbers. Yeah. Those are all extremely different skill sets. Yeah. And then they all have to work collaboratively as a team without butting heads.
From experience, again, I noted all these down. Civil servants, game masters in role-play games, science teachers, bigger war gamers are good for map control and rules-oriented games. Those in marketing, liberal arts are really good for team control because they have a more empathetic skill set, but they're not necessarily, most liberal studies teachers I've ever met over my years are absolute rubbish when it comes to numbers, but they're really good at empathy and differentiation. They can spot a differentiation within a group and get the say they're not getting involved to look out for them. A science teacher, because of their nature, they tend to look for the exceptional, so they want it fast, they want it precise, and they want it now.
So, Bernie, can I focus in briefly? You mentioned the idea of team controls, which I think is a concept that I saw a little bit when I first joined the mega game scene, but seems to have been gradually disappearing from mega game control structures.
I'll try and expand it. It's team control, running councils. It's all of those ones where it's not directly to do with a forced output.
Direct player moderation.
Team moderation.
So you're talking someone who's sort of follows or sits with a team and essentially provides them with guidance.
Yeah, well, gives them a bit of background history, what their options are, not to make the decisions for them. Because again, one of the things I had here was those team control that say things like, my team will do, I will do. And it was like, oh God, no. And they're making, sometimes they make a decision they couldn't possibly know, but control could have found out from other control. And it's like, no, you're not to make a winning team. You're to facilitate, allow them to make mistakes. But if you do get something exceptionally right, or then yeah, let them get away with it. But when you direct, when we've had certain control who've been banned from being control now, they just get too involved. They want their team to win.
Yeah.
And that can be really annoying.
I think you just hit on actually the number one thing that all of us left out is you want controllers who are not there to be players, right? So there is a subset, at least in my community, of controllers who realized if I want to have a lot of agency in the game, be a controller. And you don't want controllers that are trying to directly have agency to create the cool thing, to create the big thing, to create, because those controllers will take over the game.
Yeah. I had my Spanish Civil War. I actually had a practicing anarchist as the anarchist team control, and he just regaled them with stories and options that they had in 36 to 39, and they had a hoot of a day. And they were making mistakes and they were making success stories. But when it came to fighting for Madrid and Barcelona, they're the ones you wanted there. They were brilliant. They really were focused on the people.
So
Go on, sorry, Darren.
I know, Bernie, you sort of and John, you mentioned sort of casting control, but I also think, I mean, if you have people who volunteer to be control for a game, they will sort of self-select as well. So the players who love the mechanics, who might be keen board gamers, they'll naturally drift towards that side of the game.
Yeah, some of the control are certainly better at control and are stunning at control, but very poor players because they probably don't do it that often. And so they miss that skill set, which goes with being players. Again, Chestnut Lodge is very lucky. I play about a third of the games, or the 2/3 I'll be control. And I think that's fairly sort of common across the board for the other players within the group. They have that experience. There's people like Jim has probably played 4 Megagames in 40 years, and Brian Cameron, who I think has played 6 and being controlled at 100 and plus. Yeah. And same for Dave Boundy. He was my Lenin, but he was only plays once a year, perhaps, even when we're doing 6 and 8 games. So we do self-select. Because we're a community, it's a case of, I'm willing to, if you can allow me to play in that favoured game, because that topic really fascinates me, but I'm quite happy to be controlling in a lot of others. I would have given my left arm to be chief of staff in Rob's World War III game, because that's what I did at college. So the Soviet military, that's what I want to be. I'd do anything for it.
Okay. So I'm going to move us slightly sideways at this point, because we've been talking a lot about sort of the perspective of the game runner and the game designer, which is very useful to a small percentage of our listeners, but to the broader group who wants to be part of a control team and want to contribute to a mega game, what sort of 1 or 2 things can they do to really build that skill set, or to really make their contribution valuable on the day?
That is a good question.
Anyone?
Do
Yeah.
you want to do my 5 minutes again?
Oh, go on, Bernie.
Sorry.
Not at all.
I think a lot of us do control handbooks that upload. I know in my ones, my personal aims, hopes, expectations, fears, and whatever, but never to drag the game in sort of one direction. Emerging play is vital. For example, in the 3 versions of My Russian Civil War, we've had a red win, a white win, and a green, the independent and white win. So it isn't a game that's directed in a certain way. Player agency will define it. So, but the control needs to know what the parameters of that are. When we're doing many mega, they tended to have a chat with the control team during the after game drinks about what the expectations of the next mega game was, and that was really useful because it could discuss with them their hopes, fears, and whatever that they had for the game. So that was always very useful. And always try to design some of the game with the control players. Again, we have Chestnut Lodge and Brian's pad to actually play test a lot of this, and sharing the experience of a design is so useful, because there's things that you sitting in your garret typing away are very different when it actually gets the experience of real people making decisions. It diverts the game to whole new areas, so it actually revitalizes and gives a really added dimension to the games that we're designing. That's me finished that time.
Yeah, so I think what you've described is sort of a fantastic way for more experienced control to contribute in actively participating in the game design. And I fully agree, like where you have more experienced control, the earlier you can draw them in, the better in the terms of the design process. I would like to hear, because I think more of our audience probably are in the position of sort of either wanting to control or having control maybe once or twice. So thoughts on people in that position, and again, what they can do either to get themselves ready for controlling, what attitudes they should bring on the day, what approaches they should take on the day to enhance their own contributions.
And so for me, the best thing I can say to a controller is two factors. One, you will get overwhelmed. Don't worry about it, because if they've never played a mega game, or they're a mega game, they've played a mega game but they've never run one, or they've never controlled before, there is a tendency, I find, for a lot of controllers to feel that organized chaos, as a lot of people call it, and worry that they're doing something wrong. And then that will detract from their experience, or will make them worry they are not meeting their players. So understanding that that is inherently part of the genre for a lot of people, not everybody, some people can thrive in that environment, but a lot of people, when they've got all that stuff coming at them, be it rules, mechanics, people, there's that tendency to go, oh, I'm overwhelmed. And that's okay, right? So knowing that, but really being able to bring kind of an improv mindset of, when dealing with that player, that yes and. Even if the player is bringing something that is way crazy or game breaking, not to meet it with rejection, right? Because if you meet it with rejection, then you get an adversarial relationship to that player. Even if you end up saying no to that player, or it doesn't make sense in the mechanic, if you meet them with an openness, right, to their suggestion or their thing, then you can become collaborators in the overall world, right? And so I found a lot of novice controllers, myself included, when I first ran my game, go, that's not possible, as the initial, no, don't do that, that'll break the game, whatever, right? But being open, and then having the conversation with that player is a huge skill. And if that permeates the control team from the top to bottom, where the game can go is way outside the bounds of any mechanics that we bring up. And I think that's why we keep on going towards more and more simple mechanics, because that has a lot more room for agency.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I'd also add that I think if there's a degree of patience that you need to have as a facilitator, and an ability to listen as well. And at the same time, an ability to do that sort of time management, so that you're not the facilitator who's part of the game is just lagging and bringing everything else down. So, I mean, those are quite general skills. And yeah, if you can, if you've got that sort of mindset of to listen to what players are telling you, to interpret it into how that can be something that happens in the game, and the patience to just to listen and to do that to the 6 or 7 players that you're looking after the whole day long, then I think those are fantastic skills.
Yeah. So the common theme I'm getting very much is that listening empathy thing again, which we've sort of is just so critical. We've got a comment in the chat from Paddy, who says that the standard advice he gives to new control is to default to a yes but. So it's not quite as you get to do what you want as a yes and, but there's always a sort of, yeah, you can do that if you first sort of meet these criteria. Okay, it's not, you don't get it for free, but it's never a completely rigid no.
And for those types of no's, making sure, at least this is my advice to players, if they need a mechanical no, I generally tell them, because I'm usually our lead controller, come to me for a mechanical no. Find some reason within the narrative where the story is going. If you need to give a no, make it contextual, not, well, the mechanics can't handle that, or we can't do that. No should never be due to the mechanics of the game.
Good point.
Yeah, for sure. The game always goes beyond the mechanics.
Yeah.
So we've got a question in the Q&A from Pete Nixon, who wants to know, for all of you, what sort of professional experience you brought to playing or running mega games. Does running a mega game team look like your professional life, or is it a radically different skill set? And I guess particularly knowing that John has a background in the Navy, whether that sort of Navy command structure is good, bad, indifferent for running a mega game.
Speaking specifically to military structures, they're not very useful in a mega game situation, because military structures are all top down, right? So you have a very limited window or scope of information that you're acting on, and you have to trust that the people parallel to you and the people above you not only have the correct information but are acting on the information. And like I said about, like, my ideal structure would be that almost flat, or flat with maybe one tier above, right? As a game controller, I don't care how experienced you are, if you expect to make every decision in a mega game as a game controller or as a designer, you are in a delusional landscape where, I mean, it would just absolutely bottleneck. Whereas the commander, right, in a situation, you're trusting all those teams to make those decisions, but at the end of the day, you're accountable for those decisions. It just doesn't feel quite the same. If there's not something in a mega game as a game controller that I had zero awareness of, then I'm probably doing it wrong, in my opinion. There's always something I expect to find out in the post briefing, and I should, it should have been run by my team. I guess that is similar. Anyways, I'll let somebody.
Yeah, Bernie, Darren, what about yourselves? Any experience from professional life that informs how you?
Yeah, so I was a project manager, and I was just saying before the talk, I've now graduated to be a restaurant manager, and both of those are, anything that's kind of team based, where you're managing a team, then I think that definitely transfers to mega games, because they're, a control team is a team. But I've often thought that the kind of ideal profession that would just smoothly go over to mega game control would be, as a kind of game control, would be like orchestra conductor. Someone who just sits there with the baton. that would be my ideal. I think that's kind of an ideal game control position. You're just looking at the clock and keeping time, and that's it. That's all you do.
I feel like you've probably just profoundly insulted the entire profession of orchestra conductors there, Darren. I do know what you mean.
Yeah, if there's any orchestra conductors in the audience, I apologize.
they're making the big calls, right? Where the crescendos
Yes.
happen, the timing happens.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they have very little bearing on the performance of the individual.
Yeah. And everybody says, well, why do they
100%.
need a conductor? You know, but what does the conductor do?
There is a Polish
Keeping it all
orchestra that
together.
does not have a conductor.
Nice.
Is there?
Yeah. They always made and it wasn't just during the communist times. It went back to the 20s. They made a conscious decision not to have a conductor. They had a bandmaster to prep them, but on the day the orchestra operated with just the first violin.
Okay.
Aggregate.
We can try that with Megagames. You know, they just operate with chief map control. Is the
And you need a very, very central. I think with a lot of mega game structures, at least in the lead up of the game, it's so reliant on the energy of that designer or that team controller or whoever is that kernel person, that the game reflects that lead up to the game, right? If you had a group of controllers who were all on that same level, working energetically for the game, but we tend towards an individual who is really driving that game to fruition, and that manifests on game day as well. And they need the support team, right? Because just no one individual can bring a mega game. That's just not.
Okay. So speaking of support,
we didn't hear about Bernie's background, which I like.
Beg your pardon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
I would
sorry.
love to
I've very much same experience to John. Never in the military, but being in a very hierarchical business structures. I've never worked for the state in any shape or form. Always worked in sort of business, and it's all despite the culture about and I have a cartoon in my office that the RDs always hate, and it's a group of birds, and on the bottom row it says workers, lower management, middle management, and then whatever, and at the top there is the big eagle, and he's crapping on everybody else.
Oh no.
And because shit rolls downhill, and it's a case of it's our job at our particular levels to prevent it going any further and clearing up the mess. And they've always hated that cartoon, but I will take it with me at the end of this month when I leave.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. No, that's a good insight, and I think it is a very valid point that that sort of central command and control structure, we could debate whether it has any value in the workplace, but that's another panel altogether.
Definitely.
But certainly in a mega game context, it can do a lot more harm than good if you try and hold the cards too close to your chest as the game runner.
Yeah, I think for a new designer, there's a lot of fear, right, in letting go of that control, right? And you just got to trust that the game's going to be better for it.
Oh, and to call on other designers, even worldwide, just to review a handbook or make any sort of comments. We're always around. Megagame Makers and Megagame Assembly. It's just a call on that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because none of us want to see games to fail, because it's such a precious sort of hobby to be in.
100% agree. I want to zoom in on a bit on the question of preparing your control team for a game. Are there any sort of practical steps you take in the lead up to a game to, Bernie's touched on a couple I think already, but to get your team ready, to give them guidance? Actually, to be fair, John's also touched on this in terms of running the pre-games, but anything else in that category that we haven't covered?
I mean, so the whole reason why I ended up doing the pre-games is because I found that trying to get especially controllers who are new over the mechanics allowed them to get into the improvisation mindset, right? Especially if I don't have players or controllers that I know can improv, making sure that they feel 100% in the mechanics so that we can then let go of or loosen the mechanics. Because if they're struggling to do the mechanics, they get very like tunnel vision on okay, how does that dice roll go? How does that card play go? Whatever. But if I've gotten them over the mechanics, they start to make higher level decisions. Or even if we have to scrap a system, they don't feel like they're alone, right? Because if they're sitting there, oh God, the mechanics, it's gone. That's a disaster, especially if players are also holding on to the mechanics like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned this, John, about just training sessions, whether it's focusing on one specific sub game or trying to give an overview of the whole game together. And I think it's also it's interesting if in the training sessions, if you can mix control around. So they might be looking at part of the game that they won't be running on the day, just so everybody's got that overview. And another important facet of that, and this is something you've mentioned in a blog a while back, Ed, was everybody kind of gets an idea of the value of the different resources in the game, so that you can make those improvised decisions of cost without, does it cost 1,000 gold to get this achieved? And that's just something that is never going to happen in the game. So you're essentially saying to the player, no, you can't do that. Or do you set it's finding the right value for this. It's going to cost you 3 gold to do this, and that's a reasonable amount of money in the game. And you need a kind of overview of all the components to be able to judge that on the day. So that's.
No, you're right. It is something I've always tried to stick into control guides for the 2 games I've designed. But these are the key resources, and they're roughly this plentiful. So this resource is roughly twice as common as this, or there should be roughly this much sloshing around the game. Just again, as you say, to give people an idea if they have to make a call on cost of what a credible cost is, and what's cheap, what's fair, what's eye-wateringly expensive but achievable if they really want it. Which again, I think it comes under the broader category of that, making sure your control team are intimately familiar with the mechanics of the game, so that they then have a framework to improvise in. We're coming closer to the end of our time, so if people in the chat have questions that have been sort of bubbling in their head, now is the time to type them. But I have one final point to discuss among us, which is the sort of slightly dream scenario. If you had sort of unlimited resources, unlimited budget, unlimited time to provide training experience of any kind for your control team for a mega game, what would you do? Any takers?
I want a wing of Amboise Chateau on the Loire for the control team. Or I'd like a nice big dacha outside Moscow for my Russian Civil War game.
Okay, so just a really nice holiday.
Definitely.
Incredible. I think that's... Go on, Darren.
I don't know. I mean, I think the most precious resource is actually just having the time and the time to run the multiple training sessions.
Yes.
And one thing, I mean, this is partly an answer to the previous question. I think it's also nice if you could get the team to take part in the design process of the game as well. So if you just had that huge amount of time, that would be a precious resource, and time's free. So I don't know why why we don't have that amount of time to prepare for
opportunity cost is not though.
No.
Jim
So
used to. Oh, sorry.
No. Go ahead, Bert.
Jim Walmer used to do face-to-face control training sessions up at forgotten which in London somewhere. A couple of years back. I think he only ever did he did sort of 2 of them, and I thought they were very useful for trying to bring people who hadn't been control before, because they were for new control people, but I've no idea what the numbers were who attended those sessions, then went on to control either with Megagame Makers, Reading or Pennines, because I'm sure there were some people from Pennines at one of the sessions.
Okay.
Yeah, I went to the first one. I think I found it really useful as well.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Excellent. What sort of things, Darren, were covered there? What were your key sort of, if you can remember, what were your key?
So the one I went to, there was so Jim gave a sort of talk about these are the key skills that I've come across in being control. A lot of it was what we've mentioned: empathy, listening, and then we all got the chance to control a zombie game. I don't know whether Jim was also using it to test out.
Oh, I'm sure he was.
I'm sure he was as well.
Yeah. But I mean, that we got a chance to run a sort of a blind map game and see all the different roles of control. There were 3 different roles, and we, everybody was put into teams of 3, and we each got a chance to take those 3 different roles. So it was just a really great overview of this is what being control is like. And
if you ever put that online?
Hmm?
Did he ever put that online? Because that might be a useful. If there's a package of all that information, that might be quite useful for the newer teams.
I don't think he did. No.
So for those who missed it, Jim did give a presentation yesterday on facilitation in Megagames with a lot of valuable information, which will at some point appear in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, on the MegaCon YouTube channel. Yeah. So watch out for that. And if you're watching this on the YouTube channel, then that other video is probably there as well. But yes, I mean and obviously the online presentation is super valuable. The opportunity to do that sort of in-person control practice with an experienced game runner there to sort of guide you is incomparable.
Yeah.
John Keyworth's put a note in the chat to say, if you had unlimited budget and resources, just hire a bunch of people to play the full game as a sort of warm-up for your control team.
Forever.
Yes.
I'd hire someone to design it for me, and then I'd hire players to play it. Have to do nothing.
Fantastic. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I guess the key point being that there's learning by doing is always the best way ultimately, and as you've described, Darren, if you can find ways to give people that hands-on experience, then yeah, there's little that compares to it in terms of the value in training.
I mean, just to kind of go back to, as you said, Ed, to kind of maybe address the audience for this, if people are thinking of volunteering for control or facilitating a game, I mean, that's and if you're a game runner and people come up to you and say, I'd like to help in your next game, you'd have to have a very good reason to say no. Yep. I mean, you can always find ways for people to contribute immensely to the running of a game.
Even if it's not an official role that's in your handbook or something, having information runners, or one of my favorite things to do is what I call pseudo players. So players who have been given agents, or controllers who have been given agency within the narrative, but they have no control responsibilities for things like debate games, having more people in the room with less power than the players, that add immensely to the overall gestalt, as long as, again, they're not trying to power play the game. Then it becomes its own problem.
Yeah, often I've heard that referred to as a plumpire role, and it's sort of the sort of player/umpire, and it can add a great deal, because when it's done right, you've got someone who is sort of accepted as part of the social contract that they might just get ignored, and that's okay. Yep. But is there to add richness and color to the game if players try to engage with them.
Well, and you can put them in roles that, if you put a player there, would be an exile for 8 hours, right? But you can put this player in there who can then act within that as almost, like in, again, Watch the Skies, the UN, having more voices than the Big Five or however many teams you have on that panel greatly affects how that debate goes on. Whereas if it's just the power brokers, and if you put a player in that situation, they sit there going, well, I have no agency.
I fond memories of my own game, By the Grace of God, where one of my control team turned up literally bringing 6 hats with him, on the basis that he was playing 6 different agreed, none of whom would have had a real role in the game, but all of whom needed to be present to be engaged with. I mean, he had a blast, and I think so did the players who were engaging with him. So it was good.
It wasn't sort of found in the corner of the room by 3 PM, actually just talking to himself.
Yeah, that's the risk. I mean, I think there were certainly times when sort of as the King of Spain, he tried to persuade people to attack Portugal and then put on his Portuguese hat and
Yeah, we've had that in the past with minor powers control declaring war on themselves in a civil war. Yeah. And that gives great colour. And it's remembered years later. Yeah.
It adds to that context. I didn't really answer my question, or the what I would do with unlimited resource. I think it's no secret that I'm dabbling with computer controlled stuff. But my thing is giving control. If control doesn't have to be focused on mechanics, they provide great narrative, right? When control gets out of that mechanics mindset, they do amazing things that add to that color as the game that Bernie was looking for. So looking for whether it's by lowering the threshold of the mechanical game or by finding ways for control to engage in driving that narrative. We're not here for the dice roll. We're not here for right? That's wargaming. There's a reason we're not wargaming. So finding that way for the narrative to thrive in a realistic way without the rules getting in the way, that for me, whatever the avenue, whether it's simplicity of game and training or digitization, whatever that avenue is, that's really where I think the genre is going to thrive no matter what, especially crisis games in general, no matter what we do.
Yeah, fully agree. Yeah. And often, to be fair, the solution to that is designing mechanics that players will be able to run on their own past the sort of first couple of turns. And then the role of control becomes just that narrative layer, and possibly a bit of a timekeeper, because that will
time is up.
Needed.
Decision must be made.
Like, don't get me wrong, I'm super excited to see. And I don't think I mentioned when introducing you actually, but Project Nexus, which you've been leading up on, an attempt to make a fully digital mega game platform, is very exciting potential there. And I think we are entering a world sort of as little as 5 years ago. If someone talked about bringing tech to a mega game, I'd have shuddered and said, don't even consider it.
As well you should.
Something will break, you don't know what, but something will break. But I think we are approaching a point where there are so many of these sort of standard plug and play tools out there that have been tested to absolute destruction that you should always have a backup still. But it's beginning to be genuinely viable, I think, as a route to go down.
But it requires much more testing than a traditional control team, because if a traditional control team breaks something, you can always improvise your way out of it. If you're relying on tech, I mean, even an online implementation, right? If Discord goes down and you're relying on Discord, the game is over. Yeah. Yes. They're commenting in the chats. Even a printer for the news team or anything. Yeah, and I think I don't think we should be afraid of technical implementation, but you need to have a play. It cannot be this is an irony coming from me as I am trying to digitize things, but it cannot be the crux. If there is no game without the digitization, you're not playing what we're trying to play in crisis games.
Yeah, I'd agree. We're rapidly approaching the end of time available. So if there's any sort of final thoughts or points any of you would sort of plans to make and thought of in advance that you haven't had a chance to say, now is the time for them. Come on, Bernie, there must be something.
Yeah.
I just say it's been really good to listen to the perspective from America, from Reading, from yourself as well. Because to some extent, I've only ever been to a Pennines Megagame and Megagame Makers and a few down at Sandhurst. My experience of other Megagames and other Megagame groups is incredibly limited. So it's very good to see the freshness and the enthusiasm from the other groups, and long may they sort of last and thrive. I think it's really good.
Yeah, I think also I would add that the perspective on the game that you get as a facilitator control is it's a very different experience, but it's no less fun than being a player, you know. So it's great fun being in control.
Yeah, and I would say to anybody, whether they're looking to be a designer or a game runner or even a controller, don't be afraid to get it wrong. There's a reason why the phrase, you know, no plan last on contact with the enemy, or in this case, the players, right? It exists within our space, and in general, something's going to go wrong. It's about how you flow with it, and did everybody have fun with the game in the end? And a lot of the times, you know, these what went wrong becomes a part of what's fun if it is done right. So that fear of getting it all right or making it all go correctly, just jump in. Just jump in. You will improve over time for sure.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you all so very much. To those who are watching along, we will hopefully navigate over to the pub channel in the MegaCon Discord at this point. So if people have more questions they'd like to ask verbally or just to chat, then do join us there. There is a seminar from Holly on first-time game design. Is it worth it? Happening very shortly. I haven't got the time to hand, but I believe it's in 15 or 30 minutes. It is in 15 minutes time, so do check in on that as well. And other than that, thank you all for coming, and thank you all for
hope to see you in my dacha in Moscow in a few months' time then.
Looking forward to it.
Yes, we won't drink all your wine.
See you all, chaps.
Yeah, bye-bye. Thank you.
Cheers.